This is Ringler Radio, where you get all the latest news and information about settlement solutions, litigation, mediation, and structured financial security from Ringler, the largest and most experienced company of settlement consultants in the United States. Ringler has been helping injured people and their families since 1975. Ringler Radio is made possible in part by American General, Liberty Mutual, MetLife, Mutual of Omaha, New York Life, Pacific Life, and Prudential. Now join Ringler Radio host Larry Cohen.
Well, hello and welcome to Ringler Radio, everyone. I'm Larry Cohen, the head of Ringler's Northeast Operations, and we're certainly glad you could join us again today. We're talking about chronic traumatic encephalopathy, better known as CTE, a brain condition associated with repeated blows to the head. You know, for some time, the game of football and the NFL have been at the forefront of CTE litigation, and now the National Hockey League is in the penalty box, facing litigation related to concussions and CTE in their sport. And joining me today as my co-host in this discussion is my friend and Ringler colleague, Bob Caples, head of our Houston, Texas office. And with that, Bob, thanks for being here as my co-host. I always love having you.
Well, Larry, I always enjoy being invited, so thanks so much.
Terrific. And our guest today is attorney Mike Andrews from the Beasley Allen law firm in Montgomery, Alabama. Mike has a particular passion for working on behalf of injured children, along with an interest in cases involving traumatic brain injuries. In fact, he's the president of the board of directors of the Alabama Head Injury Foundation. So with that, welcome back to Ringler Radio, Mike. Always good to have you here, and thanks again for joining us.
Well, Larry, thank you for having me back. It's always a pleasure to be on and talk about all the different topics that we cover.
Yeah, there are a lot, aren't there?
There are.
Well, in 2013, several former hockey players brought a lawsuit against the National Hockey League, claiming that the league should have done more to educate them about concussion-related risks inherent in the sport. The NHL is still engaged in that lawsuit some 5 years later. So tell us about that, Mike. What's going on with that?
Man, what a hot topic. You know, CTE, chronic traumatic encephalopathy, as you said at the outset, is caused by repeated blows to the head. And if you think of the brain cells as workers, and the protein structure in the brain, which is called the tau protein, as sort of a scaffolding for the workers to work on and in and be contained in. Well, when you have repeated blows to the head, you damage the protein structure and you begin to release some of the tau proteins, which begin to bind. Now, the brain can repair itself, but over time, with too much impact and too much free released damaged tau protein, you begin to experience diseases like Alzheimer's, like CTE, and several of the other brain diseases that are associated with chronic impacts. So then you get to the NHL, which is what you've asked me about. And, you know, they have really approached this issue completely differently from the NFL, the National Football League. For years, the NFL denied that there was an issue. They refused to give information, did not as much actively give false information or disinformation, just refused to acknowledge it. But the NFL has come around more recently. Now, one of the sort of insidious things that they did was to fund medical research to debunk some of the science initially. But more recently, they've come around and have put up a fund to pay for claims for former NFL players who are suffering from CTE. The NHL, on the other hand, is crazy. They, not only do they not recognize that it is an issue in their sport, at the last deposition of the NHL commissioner, he said, "I don't even know what that is. I don't even recognize what CTE is." And so you've got a continual denial and also just disinformation.
Yeah, we're going to get into that.
So the lawsuit has been ongoing. Now, the latest that I have heard, and I don't know that it's been finalized yet, but for some 150 claimants, the NHL had proposed putting up about $18 million, which is a pitiful amount, quite frankly. I think, and again, I'm not privy to that settlement, but I think that's two-pronged. One, it would pay each claimant somewhere around $20,000, and we're talking about for a brain injury, and you receive $20,000.
Well, it sounds to me like that's a starting point, and we'll get into this a little more during the show. We'll discuss a little bit more about that. Bob?
So, Mike, the NHL commissioner, Gary Bettman, has said that the suit doesn't have merit in denying a link between blows to the head and CTE. Could you tell us how Bettman's denial of the connection compared to the NFL's current perspective?
I think it'd be easier to compare Bettman to Rudy Giuliani in that you can't believe anything either of these guys are saying. If you have someone who is charged with the care of professional athletes who would look you in the eye and tell you there's no correlation between a blow to the head and brain injury, then you got to wonder what else they're covering up or being dishonest about. Again, we are at the point with the science where when enough brains of deceased players have been tested and evaluated and found to exhibit the telltale signs of CTE, then there's really no questioning the science behind it. The question then becomes, how do we prevent and treat the injury? Well,
there's no question about that. But, as you know, Mike, there's been a growing list of NHL players who've already had a concussion this season. But teams evidently are not required by the league to publicly release injury specifics. And what are your NHL player clients telling you about that aspect of it?
Well, of course they're not going to release it. I mean, it's not in their best interest to tell you how many of their players are suffering brain injuries. That's counterproductive to their program. But anyone who played, and certainly, fans have all seen a player or two that you follow that takes a particularly bad hit, goes down, and he's never the same again. And if it's just the edge of the aggression is taken off, the fight in the player or the quickness or the agility, whatever it is, you can see a difference. And so, again, the commissioner and the league can deny all they want to, but the facts are there, and you can see it with your own two eyes.
Yeah, sure. Bob?
So, Mike, although the NHL claims there is no direct link between these head injuries and CTE, they are still taking measures by monitoring players for concussions. I think, for example, there are now central spotters watching every game from NHL offices. You think that's enough, or what else can they be doing?
That's window dressing. That is, I'm gonna do something here and make it appear that I'm taking, enough steps to look like I'm doing something to help. And a central spotter, look, anybody who watches the game is a central spotter. Okay? Anyone who watches the game and sees someone take a hard hit to the head and recognizes that, well, you've done the same thing. You've seen it just like a spotter has done. But there's nothing being done about it. The correlation here would be if you've suffered from a gunshot and you go to the emergency room and there is a spotter in the emergency room who says, yep, you've been shot. And that's it. It ends right there. It's the very same thing. There's nothing that's being done about this. And if you've got spotters who are watching it and also looking you in the eye and telling you, yeah, this isn't a thing.
Well,
you got a real problem.
The NHL being involved in this now is somewhat new. I mean, a lot of people have been listening and talking about the football experience with all of this. But, when you look back and think that it wasn't too long ago that hockey players didn't wear any helmets. There was nothing to keep their heads from being exposed. And also, what do you think about this concept of allowing fighting, punching right within the course of the game, where blows are being struck to different players' heads. I mean, there's a lot of elements of this game which I think are people we're just beginning to realize maybe some of the aspects of brain injury in the NHL. Some of that seems quite odd to a lot of us. Is that the way it strikes you?
Well, yeah, and it's interesting that you bring that up. The NHL seized upon the fighting aspect of the game to try to separate it from something that they would say would be inherent, and that would just be incidental contact as you're going for the puck, going for the goal. And by doing that, they want to try to put more responsibility on the individual player by saying, oh, he was fighting. And everybody knows you're not supposed to fight. Well, the problem is everybody knows that's part of.
Well, at least at the NHL level, they certainly encourage it. They seem to encourage it for the way it the fans seem to like it.
Exactly, and that's part of the game. And so they're trying to use it as both a shield and a sword. To say it's their fault, but also, hey, look, tune in next week and you'll see another great fight.
Well, you know what? There's just another twist and turn in a lot of the litigation you're involved in, Mike, and you see it all. So we're awful glad to have you here talking about this today. Well, let's take a quick break right now, but we'll be right back in a minute, right here on Ringler Radio.
This is Ringler Radio, brought to you from Ringler, the nation's leading provider of fair settlement solutions. Did you know that Ringler is involved in a third of all structured settlement cases in the country? Ringler advisors work with all the parties in a lawsuit settlement to find the best possible financial solution for the people involved. Everybody wins. There's a Ringler consultant in all the major cities of the U.S. No one has more experienced experts in the settlement business than Ringler. Check out our website at www.ringlerassociates.com for the best information for injured parties, attorneys, and claims professionals to find the Ringler advisor nearest you. When it's your interests at stake in a lawsuit settlement, you want only the best, most objective financial plan. You can count on Ringler advisors to create a customized plan that meets the financial needs of you and your family for the future. Visit ringlerassociates.com to learn more.
Welcome back to Ringler Radio. Glad you could join us. I'm your host, Larry Cohen, along with my co-host, Bob Caples, from our Houston, Texas office. And we're speaking with our guest attorney, Mike Andrews, from Beasley Allen in Montgomery, Alabama. Mike, so do you foresee additional lawsuits against the NHL by former players? What's going on in that realm? You have a lot of older players who I'm sure have been wondering why they can't seem to think straight, and looking to folks like you to help them in that whole endeavor.
You do. You certainly do expect it, unfortunately, because as we've been discussing, the NHL even today is disputing that this is an issue. And so you've got the continuation of the misinformation and the denial and keeping the information from the players. And so, as long as the game has these head impacts, as long as you've got people that are not sharing with the players, that this is happening and it is real, then of course you're going to continue to have the injuries, and then at some point you're going to have the litigation that results from that.
So Mike, especially given your background and your expertise in this area and your position on the board, we know you're very informed and very passionate about it. Would you think that the NFL is a good model for how to accept the reality of CTE and the enforcement of preventative measures and concussion protocol to lessen or eliminate head injuries? What's your thoughts on that?
Boy, that's one question we could have a very long show about. The NFL, while they did recognize the issue and set aside a fund, have denied a great number of the applicants to the fund and made it difficult for folks who might be eligible to even recover under it. And so you've got an administration issue there with paying and honoring claims. That's one issue. And so, you can't say this is a good model because there's problems. There are definite problems with it. The other side of that is, again, you've still got head impacts and you've got chronic repeated impacts. And so you're going to have these injuries. You have to look at the equipment at some level too. You've got to look at the helmets. You know, is the padding state of the art? Is it being monitored correctly? And this hits home to a case that I'm handling right now, not one of my NFL cases, but for a younger player who was wearing a reconditioned helmet. You know, football helmets are a declining asset. The more you use it, the less effective it becomes until at some point you have to discard it and get a new one. But unfortunately, helmets are recycled and reconditioned and retrofitted and reused over and over for years, and the level of protection declines each time you have an impact.
Well, you know, Mike, beyond the professional leagues, I know that head trauma and CTE are issues of major concern right now in both college and high school sports. And the issue seems to have permeated youth sports as well. I mean, that seems to be where this is going. Concerns about young kids, especially with maybe brains that aren't totally developed, being involved in contact-type sports like this. What's your sense of where this whole thing is going?
The risk is greater the younger the child, because their brains are in the formative stages. And when you begin to set up these cascading traumas in the brain, then the brain forms differently, the child develops differently. They're certainly more at risk for these issues later in life, but quite frankly, they become someone else. If you were to chart their life on a timeline, you would have to go back to the impact and drop down and say, okay, here's their new developmental timeline. So you get back again to the equipment, and the concussion protocol and the awareness is more important in youth sports than it is really anywhere else, because think about it for a second. In the NFL and college level, you've got highly paid, highly skilled trainers and doctors and all sorts of positions that line the sidelines every game. Well, youth sports, you know, sometimes it's called daddy ball. And you've got guys who are very well-meaning, and they've got a son who they think is going to be the next, you know, Joe Montana. And so they're going to go out and coach a game, and again, well-intentioned, but misinformed, and can subject children to head impacts that have a lasting effect.
Well, Mike, you know what this all means to a lot of people, especially you being in Alabama, very involved in the football, you know, culture. You know, a lot of people are saying, well, what's going to happen is, you know, youth sports is going to have to kind of go away. Youth football, youth hockey. If, in other words, they said if lawyers have their way, if some of these things come to fruition, the liability aspects of it and the risks about all that are going to be they're going to be too great to bear. What do you sense about the balance between participation by kids and the good that does, and the potential risk and harm from the things we discussed today?
Yeah, I think the threshold issue is really an easy one, and it's this: do you want to take care of kids or not? If you don't, then you don't have to do anything. Keep business as usual and keep going just like you are. But if you care, you know, about the safety and health and well-being and development of children, then you have to recognize there are risks that can be and should be mitigated in the sport. You've already got, you know, reduction in how far a player will run a ball back on a kickoff to try to reduce the great buildup of speed and momentum prior to the impact, to try to cut down on some of these head injuries. You know, some of those same things can be done at the youth level. And again, if you're going to have sporting equipment that is not state of the art and is not brand new, then you're only asking for these kind of injuries to occur over and over.
Well, Mike, this is a tremendously interesting topic, and it's certainly not something we can cover in one show. And I certainly hope you'll come back at some point to discuss it even further. It's got a lot of, as you know, cross currents of today's culture and today's important pressing issues. You know, not the least of which is if you need that kind of great equipment, then how do the less fortunate folks out there in maybe poorer communities, how do they deal with the issues of trying to keep their kids involved in a sporting activity without maybe the resources to do it? So, there are a lot of issues here, and I think we'll come back another time and talk about some of those as well. What do you say about that?
I am always glad to participate anytime.
Thanks a lot, Mike. Well, if someone wanted to talk to you, Mike, or about this issue or others, how would they get a hold of you?
Probably the easiest way to reach me is by email, and that's mike.andrews@beasleyallen.com. Or you can just go to our website at beasleyallen.com, and you'll find me there.
Super. That's pretty darn easy. And Bob, how about yourself, if someone wanted to contact you?
Mine is pretty simple as well, Larry. Thanks. I've got a bio page under Robert Caples on ringlerassociates.com. I suppose folks could find me on my LinkedIn page. They could certainly find me by email at rcaples, Caples, @ringlerassociates.com, or lastly by calling my office number, direct 281-937-9090.
Terrific. And as Bob mentioned, ringlerassociates.com is a great website. It's got a lot of great information about structured settlements and other important litigation issues as well. You can find all Ringler Associates on that website, and if you need one in your particular area. And, of course, you can listen to all the Ringler Radio shows. You can find them all on ringlerassociates.com. You can also find them on ringlerradio.com, legaltalknetwork.com, or on iTunes, where you can download them direct from iTunes to your device and listen to them at your leisure. So with that, Mike, I want to say thanks again for being a great guest here today. We've learned a lot, and I think we've maybe have the makings of another show, too.
Absolutely. I look forward to it. Thanks again.
Thank you. And Bob, thanks for being a great co-host.
Larry, thanks for having me. Mike, I enjoyed it.
Terrific.
Thank you.
And for all the rest of you out there, go have a great day, but wear a helmet. Take care. Bye-bye.
The views expressed by the participants of this program are their own and do not represent the views of, nor are they endorsed by, Legal Talk Network, its officers, directors, employees, agents, representatives, shareholders, and subsidiaries. None of the content should be considered legal advice. As always, consult a lawyer. Thanks for listening to Ringler Radio, celebrating more than a decade of podcasting and over 2 million listeners. Think of Ringler, the objective settlement advisors with more than 140 consultants in 60 cities nationwide. Visit ringlerassociates.com today.